there's another challenge beyond people maybe resisting creativity, which is, what do you mean creativity?
Yeah.
You might have a view of creativity that's different than mine, and especially as we think about people in different parts of the world, for example, then what counts as creative can vary tremendously. So one reason that people differ on what they think is creative is expertise. We have experts.
Right. You mean we don't get 3-year-olds to rate ideas? That
Maybe
might be
we
better.
should.
Yeah, maybe we should. Right.
After you hear about the experts, maybe,
Yeah,
So,
right.
no, I mean, look, clearly there's some ideas that require expertise to evaluate, right? So
Right.
if we're talking about a new heart rate monitor, then,
Yeah.
you might need some, medical understanding and technological understanding to know if that thing works and does what it should.
Right, and even
et
in more
cetera.
subjective areas, you have to know what's known and what's been done to make a good
Absolutely.
evaluation, which that requires expertise too.
Clearly, yeah. So expertise is necessary. The problem is expertise can become a trap.
Right, it can
right?
become problematic. Right?
Yeah. So experts generate what? Evaluative frameworks based on their expertise, right? So is this the way we do it in our
Right.
field?
So as you gain expertise, you become committed to a particular point of view, and then that constrains your ability to recognize new things, right? Yeah.
And when does that happen, right? I think it happens most at the intersection of fields,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So if I'm doing a kind of dance that's influenced by a novel kind of music, then the people who use the old kind of music
Show us, Jeff.
might not be happy.
Right.
Please.
But isn't that the problem? That's where the most creative ideas come from, right? Where we're connecting two disparate sort of sources of knowledge
It's
or
certainly a
information.
huge source of innovation, right? So that means that expertise is going to break down precisely at the point when you most
Right.
are innovative, and
then
that's problematic.
You might always be talking to the wrong expert, right? Who always thinks, oh, part of this is good, but I don't get the other part, right?
Yes, yeah. No, I've had papers like that.
Right. Yeah, haven't we all? Yeah.
Integrating across fields, and the people from one field say, I like this part, can that part.
Right.
And then the people from the other field say, I like that part, but can this part, right?
Right.
And then
So
who gets the
experts-
synthesis?
Experts are problems as
Right.
much as they're required for the process.
and they're bound
Yeah.
to domain. So we have to understand the value of expertise to understand ideas that are otherwise difficult to imagine, but also that they have limitations, which is they're normally bound to particular evaluative frameworks, limited by a
Right.
domain as it's been understood,
Right.
and not as it could.
So it could be that
go
experts are
forwards.
really good at generating conventional ideas within existing frameworks, but very bad at evaluating creative ideas.
So if you're dealing with an expert, you want to select an expert who either is less committed or is more in the domain that fits the
Right.
way you're thinking about your idea. So it may not be the most obvious expert that you're thinking of. It may be someone who's actually from a different field, but that can come into your own area and appreciate what it is you're delivering.
So it's risky. This reminds me of
Yeah.
something a mentor of mine said, that once in a while there's an error in the review process and something interesting gets published. So maybe we have to get around the experts and just rely on random error almost.
Science advances at one death at a time. It's the same argument that expertise is a trap, but also necessary. So when we think about expertise, we often think about technical areas, right? So whether it's something in engineering or in the fine arts, where it requires a fair amount of knowledge and understanding of the history to know how to evaluate a particular idea. But there are a huge array of ideas where it's not clear what the domain of expertise actually is, right? So if I'm evaluating a song for creativity, that's for popular consumption or a consumer product or something like that, what's the expertise involved exactly? And that makes us think about where the expertise comes from. Expertise is really generated through a community of people. It's a form of culture. And as a result, a second reason different people might evaluate items for creativity differently is that they think differently about what creativity means because they're part of a different cultural community. So different cultural communities develop distinct understandings. Herb Clark, I think, made this point using a really sharp example. So he thought about, what does murder mean? Well, if you're a soldier, it might mean one thing. If you're a lawyer, it might mean something else. If you're a vegan, it might mean something different. And if you're an anti-abortion activist, a fourth thing altogether. So where exactly do we draw the lines, and what is and more and less central can vary across different communities. And the same is true for creativity. So for example, Jennifer Mueller and I studied what indicated creativity to working adults in China and the United States. We found that nearly everyone in both countries thought that breakthroughs, perspective changes, rare items, thought that were signals of novelty, basically, and indicators of creativity. However, when we were thinking about other concerns, such as consumer benefits, functionality, or community benefits like harmony or addressing a social need, those were places where there were differences between many people in the US and many people in China. So many people in the US tended to be more narrow and focused on novelty primarily, whereas people in China and a minority of people in the US tended to think much more broadly about what could contribute to something being called creative. So just as a pretty simple example, we talked about a watch and said you were reading an online review, and the review said that the watch was for a mass market. Well, folks in China tended to think that that indicated it was a creative watch, whereas most of the folks, 75% in the US, thought, you know what, that's not really a signal of novelty, and consequently, that's something that's not creative at all. So culture can influence what we take as signals of creativity and consequently influence the creativity judgments that people form. Yet another reason we might make a different decision about what creativity is because of the role that we're in. We could evaluate an idea differently because of the goals and concerns of the role that we're playing in our teams, in our organizations, something like that. So in a set of studies with Jennifer Mueller and Shmuel Melwani and Jennifer Deal, we looked at the particular role of the decision maker, right? The person who has to fund, approve, etc., whatever projects are happening in an organization. So for example, we showed people a description of a pill that you swallow that would then serve as a password for logging in online and be more secure and safe. Sort of an unusual idea. But the key issue is when we presented it, we varied how many Kickstarter backers the idea got or how many Facebook likes the description had accumulated, things like that. Some people saw that the idea had a lot of that kind of social support or high social approval, and some people saw the idea had very few backers, so low social approval. Now the question is, would people perceive the idea to be creative? Well, if you were not a decision maker, if you were just rating the idea based on your own individual perspective, people tended to find the idea pretty darn creative regardless of whether there were a lot of backers or a few backers, many Facebook likes or very few Facebook likes. No difference whatsoever based on social approval. The situation was very different for decision makers, however. For the decision makers, if the idea had high social approval, they thought it was creative. If it had low social approval, not so much. So the suggestion from these studies that we took is that the role that we're in generates goals and concerns that then shape what signals of creativity you attend to and what is allowed to be creative in your perspective. So what's the punchline? We have decision makers, we've got people in different parts of the world, we have experts who all might have slightly different views of creativity.
Right, so you have to know your audience, I suppose, right?
Exactly, know who you're talking to.